With me is Patrick Fussell, Global Head of Adversarial Simulation for IBM's X-Force team. In other words, he's an ethical hacker. Welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good to have you with me again. We did some videos previously where we talked about what an ethical hacker is, what the job entails, and how to pursue a career in this space. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of red teaming. You may have heard of this term. So it's a form of ethical hacking. So tell me, Patrick, what is a red team?
Well,
I'll take notes.
We have the idea of a red team exercise, right? Where we are trying to test our ability to defend against a real attacker. And in a red team exercise, you have to have somebody who pretends to be the attacker. We took this idea, or terminology rather, from the military, and it was invented during the early 60s for war games. And the idea is if you have a set of defenses or want to stop something bad from happening, and you have folks who are dedicated to making sure that it's being stopped, you have to have some guys being the bad guys and testing it out. And that's your actual red team.
Okay, and they're putting all this through its paces, and they're basically doing simulations, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so if we've got a red team, I'm going to guess there's other colors too?
Definitely. The other key one here is our blue team, right? That's our defenders. That's the folks who are out to stop the bad guys. And in the context of a cybersecurity red team exercise, this might be people like your incident responders and anybody who works in your SOC, anybody who's there to make sure the bad guys don't get in.
Okay, so here we go. Attack and defend. Now, I drew these as overlapping for a reason. What about this stuff in the middle? What do we call those folks?
Sure, that might be a purple team, and that could be referring to the idea of an exercise or an actual group of people. But in any case, what we're really doing with a purple team is getting our red team and our blue team together. Imagine they're in the same room so they can walk through an attack chain and really exercise some particular part of what that attack chain might be. So they understand how effective is some part of the defenses. So they know that when the bad guy shows up, that they've really exercised, how good are they?
Gotcha. Okay, so let's talk about, we've got the two different teams, maybe even a hybrid team here in the middle, and what are they doing? So I'm going to say, first of all, one of the things that they need, if you're going to run one of these exercises, make sure you have this, if you have nothing else, permission, right?
Yeah, we don't want to, like you said in the past, end up in our orange jumpsuit because it's just not my color.
Yeah, no, you definitely want that, because otherwise you could trigger what the actual SOC is seeing, and they may think they're under attack and they may arrest you or who knows, whatever. So don't do that. Make sure you have that. But if this is an exercise or almost like a competition, there must be some sort of rules of engagement. So what would those be typically in these?
Definitely. You have to have rules because, this is all, at some level, it's for pretend. We're not doing it. We're not actual hackers. We're not actual bad guys. And the way that we think about rules is really starts with the idea of scope. And scope defines what are the boundaries of what is going to be encompassed by the testing process. And that can mean lots of different things. So imagine you're a multinational company and you have branches in every country. So we might not want to do hacking in one of those countries for different geopolitical reasons. So you may want to exclude some geo or some region for various reasons. This could also be a restriction on people. So some companies might not want you to send phishing emails to their CEO. That person might be unhappy with that situation, right?
They may not have a great sense of humor about this or appreciate the red team, blue team. They just want it to all work. They don't want to feel like they've been made the victim of this exercise.
That's exactly right. Another really key one might be systems. Some clients have systems that need very high availability, and they may be sensitive. And so we need to know ahead of time, if we're going to interact with those systems, what are the rules that exist around those so that we don't cause any business impact, because that's bad for everyone, or no one wins there.
Yeah, a retailer who's online and you don't want to be taking down their shopping system, their e-commerce system right around the holidays or something like that. So, okay, run that exercise, but not at that particular time. So time of day or day of week might also come into play.
Definitely. Like you mentioned before, we want the ability to deconflict anything that happens. So, if there is some sort of escalation in the incident response, folks are engaged, we want to know how far do we want to let them go, and how much time and money does the organization want to spend on letting that play out.
Sure, that would be a big part of scope. Are we going to run this thing for a few days, a few weeks, a few months? Does this exercise ever end? So that would make a big difference. And then if we're going to have all of this, I'm assuming there's some sort of scoring system, right?
Sure. As the pretend bad guys, internally, we always think of our scoring as can we get to some cool objective without getting caught? But that's actually just to make ourselves feel better about, being good at what we do. The real score is how much did we help the client improve their defenses? And do we exercise them in a way that's going to make them better when the real bad guys show up?
Yeah, does security get better? Because ultimately, both of these teams are there for the same objective,
That's
and
right.
that is to improve security. Okay, if we don't have some form of referees are in here, then this whole thing's going to just turn into a food fight, I guess. So tell me about referees and what would they do?
Definitely. You have to have your referees. We like to call them our control team. The control team is anybody who exists within the target organization who's going to be read in on the fact that the exercise is happening. So we, in a real red team exercise, we don't want the blue team to know because we're going to exercise them. We're going to help them see where are their strengths and weaknesses. But there do need to be people in the organization who are aware that this is happening so that if there's an escalation or somebody does need to be read in or informed, that they can be the people who act as an intermediary.
Yeah, certainly the red team's not going to tell the blue team exactly what tactics and procedures and tools and all those kinds of things are, when they're going to attack, how they're going to do it, because then that would make it too easy. But in some cases, I think blue teams may be not even aware. They just have a red team that's doing an attack, and you need to have someone who's overseeing this whole thing and says, no, I'm dropping the flag. Your attack is a little bit too close to home, so we're going to stop that.
That's a perfect summary of the situation.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. So all of this reminds me of something that's become very popular. I hear about this from my college students that I teach at NC State University and others, and this idea of a capture the flag competition. So compare and contrast this with a capture the flag.
Sure. So, in a red team engagement, we often would have something that represents a sort of flag. And that's like, a piece of data or something that we're trying to obtain that shows that we were on a system. And this lets us do an advanced objective without potentially causing some sort of denial of service condition. So we can know, hey, we won, we can prove that we were there and sort of stop at that point. But the more traditional sense of capture the flag is a slightly more contrived type of exercise where you get a group of people in a room. They say there's some set of technical challenges that are all interconnected, and we have to solve them in some sequence to get to a flag that's hidden somewhere. It's just sort of a fun intellectual challenge of how good are you at computers?
Yeah. Test your skills and make sure that they're sharp. Compete against other teams, whoever gets to the flag first. So all done in good fun. And again, all done with permission. We do exercise in order to test our fitness and improve our fitness. And a red team, blue team type exercise is designed to do exactly that. It's designed to test your cybersecurity fitness and improve through the exercise. So an exercise like this can certainly put you through your paces.
Yeah, we always really stress this idea of challenge your assumptions. You have all these security controls, you spend all this time and money on making sure that hackers can't get in, but have you gone back and validated that? And we often find that some of those assumptions you made about your security controls are false, and you need to go make some improvements and changes.
Many times that means bringing in an outsider because they don't have the same assumptions that you have. They can look at it with fresh eyes. So that's why teams like Patrick's are able to do what they do. So you're exactly right, because if you don't do that questioning of everything, and that's what you have to do, question everything. If you don't do it, the bad guys will do it for you. You just won't like what their answer is.